Welcome, everybody. My name is Janan Budge, and I am the Principal Analyst leading our security and risk research in Asia Pacific and globally our research on people and culture and security. I've been a practitioner as well as an analyst, as well as a consultant for the last 20 years, and I feel like I've seen all sides of our amazing industry. But today I'm going to be talking to you about my number one priority and number one passion in security, and that is people and culture. And I'm hoping that by the end of this session that you're going to be as motivated and excited as I am to always prioritize people and culture, which I know may sound like a strange idea in a field as technical and analytical as ours, but I believe it is so important because it's that cultural journey that's going to make you shine and achieve your full potential. But first of all, let me start with my own cultural journey. And it begins back in 1988 when my parents took the bold decision to move themselves and their three daughters from Syria to Australia for the Australian dream. And for those of you non-Australians in the audience who are wondering what that is, it's very similar to the American dream or the Canadian dream or any other of those dreams that newly immigrants have in their minds. And this is what transpired. This is me, by the way. I eagerly accepted the challenge. I was 13 years old. I spoke fluent Arabic, some French, excellent maths, and three words of English, which were egg, orange, and water. And I also had pigtails and a monobrow and did not understand any of the 1980s cultural nuances. I had 4 years to make it into university. We moved to the Arabic hub of Australia to safety, familiarity, and to comfort. Why am I telling you a story about myself in the middle of RSA conference? I am suggesting to you that my challenges as a teenager trying to decipher my new Australian culture are very similar to yours actually as a security leader, as a security professional, when you step into the organization and you try and achieve your security aspirations. I spoke three words of English. At a very practical level, this meant I couldn't understand what my teachers and peers were saying and nearly burnt out a science lab. I was painfully shy, making it very difficult for me to make friends. Life on the playground certainly wasn't pleasant in those early days for all of the reasons described above. And I had one view of the Australian dream, and that was my parents be good at math, science, and computing, technical, analytical. And the temptation to stay in the multicultural hub in Sydney with an abundance of Arabic groceries and familiar scents was overwhelming. I know from hundreds of conversations with many of you that you security professionals, security leaders actually face very similar challenges. We in security do not naturally come out speaking the language of the business as our first language. I know when I interviewed board members, one board member told me, as directors realize this is a complicated topic, we need security leaders to use terminology that makes sense to experts in the business. We are also shy. We shy away from politics. And I'm going to talk about politics a little bit later, and I'm going to want your comments and perspectives in the chat. This reluctance to engage in politics has actually put us in a position where we cannot influence key business decisions. We are not always well received or perceived. As a chief operating officer of a large tech company told me, the perception is still that security is an impediment and the bane of convenience. And something I'm going to raise with you all today, toxicity. Security teams are actually plagued with a hidden problem that we don't yet know how to talk about, toxicity. And we try to hold on firmly to what we know, security, technology, and tools. If any or all of this sound familiar, that's great news. I'm here to help. And to overcome these challenges, what I'm suggesting in this presentation is that your focus needs to shift to prioritize human interaction and culture. And I know one CISO in a research interview told me, you, as a security leader, you're not going to be doing security anymore. So get that off the table. Your job is now all about people, business, and strategy. And as though we have the data to magically prove this, this is from our survey at Forrester. And you can see that actually security leaders specifically spend so little time on the analytical and technical. The rest of the time is spent managing stakeholders, building awareness, developing business cases, and setting the strategy. All of these things require a significant amount of human interaction, and hence this conversation. And something that a CISO reminded me of during a research interview, security is actually a very emotional subject. I know we forget that. I know we forget this as security professionals. This is what we live and breathe. But people have very specific feelings about security, actually. So it's really important to understand those stakeholders, understand those feelings, and learn how to manage them. Because the thing with feelings is, I mean, you can ignore them if you like, but actually you won't be successful. So you need to tackle them head on. And all of this human interaction that I'm talking about, absolutely we can and we do. I've seen it. I've seen us leaving it to chance. But whether you are aware of this or not, actually every single interaction that we have, we are creating some sort of a culture. And what you don't want to do is you don't want to be sleepwalking into this culture. You actually want to be intentional for how you create it. So what I'm going to show you today is the four components of culture that I think you need to prioritize. And I'm going to start with feeding supporters and detractors. In security, as we all know, we have a lot of initiatives to push through. We have got zero trust, insider threat programs, privacy, phishing simulation exercises. With all of these initiatives, you're introducing change. And guess what? People generally don't like change. They're not comfortable with it. And it's only natural with those scenarios that you're going to have people who love what you're doing and people who hate the change. So your job is actually to bring all of these different people on the journey. So to do that, build your stakeholder map, work out who's who needs to be on board with your strategy or initiatives. What role are they going to assume in your transformation? Take the time to develop a deep understanding of each one of those players' perspectives. I've got several personas here for you to consider. They're going to be different for every initiative, for every organization, but typically in a large cybersecurity program, your CEO is going to be the ultimate decision point. You're going to have visionaries in the organization. You will need to align to their vision. Otherwise, you're not going to succeed. You're going to have champions, you're going to have budget holders, and you'll have to have different conversations with all of these people. One thing that I've learned in my career is to never, ever surprise those stakeholders with a strategy. Successful professionals, successful leaders plant the seed for the need of change and its benefits. And really, cultural change happens one conversation at a time. And you're having these conversations actually because you want to understand the remit of these stakeholders. What is their level of awareness of security? What's their level of support for security? And all of this will involve a lot of talking on your part, but actually also it needs to involve a lot of listening, because once you've listened and understood how people are likely to react to your strategy, then and only then can you steer them towards the correct outcome. And I know when I've presented some of this in the past, people are like, oh, but this is political. Yes, you're right. This is politics. And, and this is where I'd love you to jump into the chat and give me some feedback, because when I say politics, I want to know, what do you think of? Do you think of politics as a dirty word? Does it make you squirm? Does it make you block your ears? Or do you welcome and tackle it? I know that when I was doing interviews for this particular piece of research on change management, I interviewed a whole bunch of leaders from more long-standing professions, such as CROs, CIOs, CEOs, and they all told me about that moment in their career when they changed their mind about politics, when they went from thinking of politics as this dirty word to something that they embraced. And they will often tell me that this coincided with the moment when they made the internal decision to become a leader. People play politics every time they send an email or chat at the water cooler. So my suggestion on that one is get with a program. You can absolutely be political with ethics, transparency, and integrity. Now, I'm going to give you a couple of tools for your toolkit. Once you've done all your listening, you've adjusted your course, you're in a good place. So you need to work out your next maneuver. You need to actually persuade. And the thing with persuasion is, again, don't mistake it for a situation of begging on your knees type of influence. Persuasion is actually a process of professional political maneuvering at its very finest. It is ethical, it is acceptable. There's some tools for you, for example, collective momentum. You are doing a whole bunch of socializing and building the momentum so that when you finally present your idea or you finally present your strategy or your initiative, you can list all those engaged sponsors that you have spoken to. Authority, one to be used carefully, but super important. Influence comes from the top down. If your CEO believes that something is important, most of the other staff are most likely to fall into line. You've got things such as, of course, relationships, building positive relationships ahead of time, highlighting commonalities that you have with people. Then you can use this relationship to influence the program and vice versa. You can, with things like mutual exchange, you can provide some service, resource, assistance in the hope that at some point in the future, you will receive some of that back. Now, everything that I have just talked about is super important. You are creating change, you're creating a culture that buys into your vision, but take care because sometimes you can get so caught up in managing upwards, in engaging with stakeholders, whilst internally a toxic security team culture festers and you end up with infighting, unhappiness, and aggression between the security team members. And inevitably, what I've seen over and over again, a brilliant jerk comes out of the woodwork and causes dissent. Welcome to security's dirty secret workplace toxicity. This is a hidden and often undiscussed problem for us within cybersecurity, although I have to tell you, I have been talking about it extensively in the last 12 months because nothing prepared me for what happened when I asked the question on LinkedIn very innocently, what do you think causes toxicity within security? I received and analyzed 200 contributions from the community and build research and a wordle around that, which will hopefully help you. The number one cause of toxicity is actually lack of organizational support. As somebody said, it's really hard for the security team to be happy if security is viewed as a negative or tax. This culture for security team members will always be difficult. Ego was something that was repeated multiple times, and something else, the hero complex or the brilliant jerk, the messiahs, the rock stars, the bros, the invincible. This came to me as so many different names and words, some of which I'd never heard of before. But what it describes is those people in security teams who are not team players, and we all know at least one, and they feel that they and only they can solve the problem and they beat their own chest about it. Now, in doing all of this research and talking publicly about it for a while, one of the questions that kept on coming back to me was what happens if the security leader is actually the one who's the brilliant jerk? What happens if it is the CISO? And we had to take that very seriously. And if I ever get a chance to go deeper in some of these causes, actually 8 out of the top 10 causes relate to a lack of leadership at some level. Based on that and a number of other factors, we made the prediction. We make at Forrester 5 cybersecurity predictions every year. And one of those is that a CISO from a global 500 firm is going to be fired for instilling a toxic security culture. And why do we think that this could happen? There's actually a few factors. Number one is social media. I know I've been in security, as I mentioned, for 20 plus years, and sharing lists of serial toxic pests used to be the domain of private networks. My friends and I are like, should we hire this person? Should I accept a job with this person? And we'd all exchange these ideas. But what's happening now with the prevalence of social media, employees understand that they can take to social media if their concerns are discarded. So that was number one reason why we made the prediction. The second reason is we are seeing a huge move towards values-based decisions for consumers, shareholders, and employees. A couple of examples there for you. 78% of millennials are strongly attracted to innovative and purpose-driven companies. In 2019, we saw employees at Amazon, Facebook, Google, Microsoft, Twitter go on strike to protest their employers' inaction on climate change. Again, values-based. Employees specifically are collectively bargaining on ethics and morals. In Australia, a couple of examples. AMP shareholders pressured the firing of a trio of executives for harassment claims. This is not something that happened only by the employees, but the shareholders are driving this. The Ellen DeGeneres show, definitely not something you're expecting to hear about in a security presentation, but that show snagged the spotlight for bullying issues, with 3 producers being ousted as a result of bullying. Many of us, it seems, are voting with our feet as either consumers, employees, or shareholders. So some of those behaviors that have been tolerated in the past are not going to anymore. And it's really interesting for me when I dig into and try and understand what are organizations doing about it. Not much, it seems. We actually found this data that showed that 53% of employees say their firm does not address toxicity issues. So whilst people are telling us this is a really big deal, no one is doing much about it. 48% say that their firms don't allocate funding to promote a healthy workspace. And one of the things I wanted to explore in my research is, so are we speaking out about it? Is the prediction likely to come true? Is there enough of a speak out culture? And again, I asked the question of my LinkedIn network, and the responses were overwhelming. Hundreds of comments with people having very strong views about, yes, you absolutely must speak out about this, and no, it's a really terrible idea. So it's the percentages effectively from the data we analyzed, 35% to 65%. On the yes side, people have mostly noted that it's really important so that we can change the culture, so that we can make this better for future generations. The ones who said no, have said the repercussions is not worth it. There are mental health challenges, career implications, personal impacts. So it's a no. So, what do we do about this? I think, from your perspective, if you are not a leader, then it's really important for you to decide whether or not you want to speak out. If you decide to speak out, how do you speak out? That's actually going to be part of my research for this coming year, and I can't wait to share it with people moving forward. I think it's really important for all of us, and for leaders especially, to acknowledge and deal with toxicity. That means correcting culture problems before they metastasize. I find that with toxicity, if you bury your head in the sand and let it fester, it just becomes quite the situation. So it's really important to call it, actually putting labels on things, calling things out is really important. Understanding all perspectives. Is that person's behavior toxic because they are exhibiting symptoms of the brilliant jerk, or have they actually had a really tough time at home and they potentially need some counseling and some help? Fix the hero complex. And you do that by coaching empathy, encouraging and modeling positive behavior. And what I've learned through my research and my own personal experience is sometimes, as a leader in particular, you've got to make the tough calls. You do have to let people go if you cannot find a space where they stop being toxic. And going back to the theme of International Women's Day this year, which I absolutely love, choose to challenge. We all, whether we are leaders or not leaders, we all have the responsibility, we all have the opportunity to challenge. And again, I think in this day and age, it is absolutely the right thing to do. I'm now going to change tact and go outside of security teams again and engaging with organizations. In 2018, only 19% of CISOs said the lack of visibility and influence within their organization is one of their top challenges. This is down. I'm mentioning this figure, 2019, because back in 2010, that figure used to be 51%. 51% of us used to struggle with visibility and influence of security. We've come a really long way. But while this apparent increase in visibility of security and influence is a great sign, I'm not convinced that we've actually increased people's understanding of what security is. And I think you still have a huge task ahead of you, particularly in managing the human risk. Now, sadly, traditional approaches to managing the human risks have been limited to perfunctory, one-off security awareness and training session. And quite often, some of those security awareness and training completely disengage the employees from the topic, actually, because they're so long, they're so disengaging, and it ends up resulting in little long-term behavioral change. So I want to share with you a couple of pieces from our research on managing the human risk and suggesting that to manage the human risk, actually, you need to build a human-centric security program. You will have the slides, so you can look at this in a little bit more detail, but effectively, you have got 4 simple steps, simple but not really so simple because most people don't do it. Step number 1 is identifying your key stakeholders. Step number 2, determining what are some of the behaviors that you'd like to change. Step number 3, it then becomes about creating the security awareness and training initiative or initiatives and building your plan. Step number 4, measuring and continuously improving the plan. So I want to go to the stakeholders bit. And the trick with the stakeholders is getting in a lot of depth and a lot of detail about understanding who your stakeholders are. Because what you want to do is you want to focus your culture efforts up, down, across, and even outside of the organization. So if you imagine this being a triangle and you're starting at the top, you've got your executives, you've got your boards, you've got your group management committees. So what do you need from them? Yes, you need them to change some security behaviors, but I think most importantly, what you need from them actually is advocacy. Because without that executive support, security initiatives are going to fail. Security budgets will get cut, and therefore critical risks are going to be elevated. Those executives, more than ever, need education and need engagement. Number 2, moving down the triangle, business and technology leaders. Again, some behaviors to change. but also you need their buy-in, you need their support, and you need them to be engaged at project levels. For that to occur, security has to act as a team player, as a facilitator and an advisor, and to work with the business to deliver those projects that they need without compromising security. And really, that can only happen through that process of buying and listening. And then, of course, you've got the end users, and that is where you need to raise their awareness and change their behaviors. We know that organizations are as strong as their weakest link, and those end users need to be an essential part of your strategy. They are your human firewall. The thing with the end users is that the messages to them, we've got to change the way that we're doing it, guys. We need to be a lot more relevant, engaging, and consistent. And one more trend that I would like to share with you, up, down, across the organization, yes, but we also need to step outside and we need to build trust with external stakeholders. Security has to engage their customer community and exceed their expectations. I know in many parts of the world and some industries, such as financial services in particular, they are using their security and privacy and trust programs actually as a competitive advantage. So it is really important to engage with those customers also externally, and regulators, and all sorts of external stakeholders. Now, I've got a very long story short. I'm really conscious of this, but I wanted to share something else with you, because this is a step that people start with. People start with the step of, let's push out security awareness and training program. But you really needed to have done that stakeholder analysis first, understand the behavior, understand what you need from them. But even when you get to the security awareness and training initiatives, what you could either choose to do a tick in the box exercise and push something out, or you can do something really transformational, something that's going to win people's hearts and minds. And to do that, our research showed there's 10, what I'm going to call for you, design principles that you need to consider that are going to take your security awareness training from that very boring, perfunctory, to something that wins people's hearts and minds. So things such as having the courage to use humor and fun on a very serious topic. Don't be scared of that. Using experiential learning and gamification. I've got a couple of examples of that for you coming up. Using micro and nano learning. Nobody has the attention span right now to spend more than a couple of minutes consuming information, repeating the information frequently to make sure that people understand it. So, just be aware that there's some design principles that you need to incorporate. And here's some examples actually. Board members, executives, using them as an example. One of the questions that I get asked via inquiry, one of my most frequently asked questions is, what are the best board presentations to give, or what are some of the best metrics we need to give our boards? And whilst these are super important topics, I just want to note, metrics and presentations are not enough. We can and should go above and beyond and engage those executives. So a couple of examples there for you. I've seen some of my clients use gamification to simulate a company breach. The executives end up playing the role of the attacker or the executives, and they have to make on-the-spot decisions in every stage of the attack. So cool, so much energy. It just gives them a completely different perspective of security. Another client of mine placed their senior executive group in the spotlight, and they conducted research into their personal cyber digital profile. What that ended up doing is it showed those executives their personal, the risk of their personal behavior, and how information found about them online can be used against them. Some other examples, back in the days when I used to be able to travel, I was traveling in India and I stumbled across this beautiful regali. And Rangoli, I'm sorry. And for those of you who, like me, did not know what Rangoli is, it's this beautiful art using rice. And it was to celebrate Computer Security Day outside of the State Bank of India. What a beautiful way to attract customers and employees to that conversation. Back when I used to live in the UK a very long time ago, one of my clients were having issues with identity and access management behaviors. So instead of lecturing their employees about it, they invited a famous comedian to talk about identity theft in a comedian kind of a way. Again, building the hearts and minds engagement. And I know I've shared a lot with you. There's obviously a lot more depth we could have gone into. And please just don't let this be overwhelming. This is all a journey. It's not a miracle. You don't have to do it by yourself. You can share the load. And one of the ways by which I've seen my clients share the load is creating security champions networks to help create that engagement. So I've got a couple of steps for you here on the slides that you can take away for how specifically to build that network of influencers. I'm getting towards the end now, and I want to talk about possibly the most important part of this presentation for me. All of the above, everything that we've just spoken about needs skills. They are skills that we were not necessarily born with, and nor should we have. We've all had different trainings, different backgrounds, different experiences. That's what makes our industry so special and so unique. But there are skills that we need to develop. And at some point, all of us in our careers need to make a decision to build on those skills. So I'm going to give you a few. Leadership skills, people skills, so important, particularly if you're a leader, obviously, but even if you're not, it's really important that you develop unfamiliar skills, and you can do so by engaging with members, executive coaches, sponsors. Acquire communications and public speaking skills. I've had to. A lot of people have to. You don't want your first board presentation to be your first ever public speaking engagement. So start building on that. And if you are a leader specifically, it is unlikely that you're going to develop and perfect all of the skills that you need for your leadership positions. So recruit those skills and those resources that you don't have. And it's really important for me almost at every talk track and presentation that I do that that I raise this issue of mental health, particularly as we are still in the middle of this global pandemic. You need to have the mental space and the clarity. Burnout is rife in our security industry, and managing this burnout needs to be a priority. A couple of tips for you. Make sure at all times that you put on your own oxygen mask. Lead with purpose. When things get really overwhelming, go back to the purpose of why you're doing what you're doing. I find our industry in particular is extremely purpose driven. We do this for the good of society. Communicate with each other, with your boss, with your teams at the appropriate frequency with empathy and clarity, and be vulnerable. And I'm not talking about walking around the office or virtual meetings crying. No, I'm talking about being able to share parts of yourself to make sure that others understand that you're human, that you're going through challenges, which will in turn help them to open up. And as the old adage says, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Empathy, I'm finding, is something that's coming up in so many leadership and organizational conversations at the moment. Now, I want to close with this. So I talked about my own cultural journey, and I want to introduce you to the new generation. This is my daughter. Her name is Mia, and she's now 12 years old. Her challenges and mine as a young immigrant, they're not even comparable. Mia was born and raised in Australia. She never owned a monobrow. And as you can see from this picture, she's always on trend. She's a very easy person to receive and to be liked. One of the things that I admire about Mia is that she she's been raised with the importance of the skills of empathy, influence, and politics. So, for example, when Mia wants an iPhone or an app to make receiving her pocket money easier, she um, she goes through a process. She goes through a political process, and that political process happens to be exactly the same takeaways that I want you to take with you. She will start by planting a seed well ahead of when she wants that iPhone. She will document her requirements quite often. She's written me business cases. I've seen more business cases come out of that child than I have from some of my team members. Um, she will explain in her business case not how the iPhone is going to help her, but how it's going to be easier for me to track and monitor what she's doing for her safety. And in parallel to all of this, she's going to enlist my sister, my father. She'll message my best friends. She'll message my mother. She builds a coalition. She understands the concept of collective momentum. She has a growth mindset, always willing to listen and change course based on the feedback. Fearless, full of empathy, vulnerability, and possibilities. I wish for all of us to be like that next generation. Thank you very much for your time. Really looking forward to engaging more with you on the chat if you've got any questions. Also, welcome. Hit me up on LinkedIn, on Twitter. And thank you very much.